The dust on Main Street turned crimson with blood, and Nora Fletcher knew her life in Veta, Colorado would never be the same as she stepped between the saloon owner's raised whip and the trembling Chinese laundry worker cowering on the ground. It was August 1878, and the summer heat made tempers in the small mining town even shorter than usual. Nora had been on her way to the general store, her arms full of mending she'd finished for Mrs. Patterson, when she heard the commotion. A crowd had gathered outside the Silver Bell Saloon, and through the press of bodies, she could see Marcus Holloway, the saloon's owner and the most powerful man in Veta, standing over a slight man in worn work clothes. "You think you can refuse to wash my linens?" Holloway bellowed, his face purple with rage. "You think because you people built the railroad, you can pick and choose your customers?" The Chinese man, who couldn't have been more than 25, held up his hands in a placating gesture. "Please, sir," I explained. "My wife, she is very sick. I cannot take more work right now. Next week, I promise." Holloway raised his whip, and that was when something inside Nora snapped. She'd watched this man terrorize the town for 3 years, ever since her father had died and left her alone. She'd seen him cheat miners out of their wages, force women into working at his saloon, and drive out anyone who dared stand up to him. The sheriff, if he could even be called that, was in Holloway's pocket. Without thinking, Nora dropped her bundle and rushed forward. The whip came down just as she positioned herself over the frightened man, and the leather bit into her shoulder instead of his back. The pain was instant and searing, but she didn't cry out. She wouldn't give Holloway the satisfaction. "What in the hell do you think you're doing?" Holloway snarled, but his hand had frozen mid-air, the whip dangling uselessly. Nora stood slowly, helping the Chinese man to his feet. Her shoulder throbbed, and she could feel warm blood seeping through her dress, but she kept her chin high. "I think I'm stopping you from beating an innocent man for having the audacity to care for his sick wife." The crowd had gone silent. In 3 years, no one had challenged Marcus Holloway so directly. Nora could see the shock on faces she'd known her whole life, people who'd been friends with her father, who'd watched her grow up. But she also saw fear, and she understood it. Holloway controlled everything in Veta. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life, girl," Holloway said quietly, and somehow that was more frightening than his shouting. "Pack your things. I want you out of my town by sundown." "Your town?" Nora's voice shook, but not with fear, with anger. "This is everyone's town. You don't own it." Holloway's smile was cruel. "Don't I? Let's see. I own the saloon, the hotel, the livery, and the bank. I hold the mortgages on half the buildings on this street, and your little boarding house, the one your father left you. I seem to recall buying that note from the bank last month. So yes, Miss Fletcher, my town, and you're no longer welcome in it." The words hit Nora like a physical blow. Her father had taken out a loan to expand the boarding house 2 years before his death. She'd been making payments faithfully every month. But if Holloway now held the note, he could call it in whenever he wanted, and he clearly wanted to now. "You can't do this," she whispered. "I can, and I am. You have until sundown. If you're still here after that, I'll have the sheriff arrest you for trespassing. And as for you," he turned his gaze to the Chinese man, who'd been standing frozen beside Nora, "you and your sick wife are out too. I don't want to see your kind in this town again." The man bowed his head quickly and hurried away, but not before shooting Nora a look of profound gratitude mixed with terror. Nora watched him go, then turned to face the crowd. Surely someone would speak up. Mrs. Patterson, who she'd sewn for, Mr. Chen at the general store, the Hendersons, who'd been her neighbors her whole life. But one by one they looked away. Some with shame in their eyes, others with relief that they weren't the ones in Holloway's crosshairs. Only old Doc Martin met her gaze, and she could see the apology in his weathered face. "I'm sorry, Nora," he said quietly. "But he's right about the law. He can call in that note." Nora felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of Holloway and the town that had just turned its back on her. Instead, she bent down, gathered her scattered mending, and walked back toward the boarding house with her spine straight and her head high. The walk felt endless. Every step sent fresh pain through her injured shoulder, and she could feel the stares of the townspeople burning into her back. By the time she reached the 2-story wooden structure that had been her home for all of her 22 years, the tears had finally started to fall. Inside, the boarding house was quiet. She only had 2 residents at the moment, both miners who worked long shifts and were rarely around. Nora stood in the front hall, looking at the furniture her mother had carefully chosen, the curtains she'd sewn herself, the portrait of her parents on their wedding day. How could she leave all of this? But she had no choice. She'd seen what happened to people who defied Marcus Holloway. They ended up beaten, or worse. And if he had the law on his side, there was nothing she could do. With shaking hands, Nora climbed the stairs to her room and pulled out the old carpet bag her mother had brought west from Pennsylvania. She packed mechanically, her movements automatic as her mind raced. Where would she go? She had some money saved, but not much, enough for a stage ticket and maybe a week in a hotel while she looked for work. She was folding her Sunday dress when she heard the knock at the door. Hope flared briefly. Maybe someone had come to help. Maybe the town had found its courage, but when she opened the door, it wasn't a familiar face. Instead, a tall cowboy stood on her porch, his hat in his hands. He was probably in his late 20s, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that needed cutting. His clothes were dusty from travel, and a well-worn gun belt sat low on his hips. "Miss Fletcher." His voice was deep and gentle, with a slight drawl that spoke of Texas or maybe Oklahoma. "Yes." Nora's hand instinctively went to her injured shoulder, and she saw his dark eyes track the movement, then narrow at the bloodstain on her dress. "My name is Wade Thornton. I was passing through town when I saw what happened in the street. I heard what that man said to you." Nora felt her cheeks flush with humiliation. Of course he had. Everyone had seen her public shaming. "Then you know I need to pack, so if you'll excuse me." She started to close the door, but he held up a hand. "Wait, please. I wanted to say that what you did was brave. And I wanted to offer my help." "Your help?" Nora laughed, but it came out bitter. "Unless you can pay off my father's loan and stand up to the most powerful man in Veta, I don't think there's anything you can do." Wade Thornton's jaw tightened. "I can't do that. But I can offer you a place to go. I own a ranch about 2 days' ride from here, near a town called Sage Creek. It's not much yet, just me and a few hands, but I've been meaning to hire someone to help with the cooking and the house. The job is yours if you want it." Nora stared at him. "You're offering me a job? You don't even know me." "I know you stood up for someone who couldn't stand up for themselves. I know you took a whipping meant for him. That tells me more about your character than 100 letters of reference." He met her eyes steadily. "I know what it's like to have nowhere to go, Miss Fletcher. I'm offering you a choice that isn't just running with no destination." Something in his voice made Nora pause. There was an old pain there, carefully hidden but still present. This man knew what he was talking about. And the truth was, she didn't have anywhere else to go. She had a cousin in Denver, but they'd never been close, and the woman had made it clear after Nora's father's funeral that she couldn't offer any help. "I don't know anything about ranch work," Nora admitted. "That's fine. Like I said, it's mostly cooking and keeping house. Maybe helping with the books if you know your numbers." Wade's expression remained open and honest. "I can pay you fair wages and you'd have your own room. It's not charity, Miss Fletcher. It's a job offer. You'd be earning your keep." Nora looked back into her house at the life she was being forced to leave. Then she looked at this stranger who'd appeared out of nowhere, offering her something she desperately needed: hope. "All right," she said quietly. "I'll come. But I want it understood that this is a business arrangement. I work, you pay me. Nothing more." "Nothing more," Wade agreed, and she saw relief flash across his face. "Can you be ready to leave within the hour? I saw the look on that man's face, and I don't trust him to wait until sundown." Nora hadn't considered that, but he was right. Holloway was vindictive enough to move up his timeline just to make things harder for her. "I'll be ready. I just need to leave a note for my boarders and gather my things." Wade nodded. "I'll go get my horse and a wagon. If you have furniture or belongings you want to bring, we can load them up." "A wagon," Nora frowned. "That will slow us down." "Maybe, but I'm guessing you don't want to leave everything you own behind." His voice was kind, and Nora felt something in her chest loosen slightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't understand why you're doing this, but thank you." Wade settled his hat back on his head. "Let's just say I believe in returning kindness. Someone helped me once when I needed it. Now I'm passing it forward." He left, and Nora hurried to finish packing. She moved through the boarding house, selecting items carefully. Her mother's china, wrapped in linens. The photograph of her parents. Her father's pocket watch. Clothes, books, her sewing supplies. The quilt her grandmother had made. She worked quickly, her heart pounding, half expecting Holloway's men to burst through the door at any moment. True to his word, Wade returned within the hour driving a sturdy wagon pulled by 2 horses. His own mount, a handsome bay gelding, was tied to the back. He helped her load her belongings without comment, his movements efficient and practiced. When they'd finished, Nora took one last look at the boarding house. "I'm sorry, Papa," she murmured. "I tried to hold on to it." "Your father would be proud of you," Wade said quietly from beside her. She hadn't realized he was close enough to hear. "You did what was right, consequences be damned." "That takes real courage." Nora climbed onto the wagon seat, blinking back tears. Wade settled beside her and picked up the reins. As they started down Main Street, she kept her eyes forward, refusing to look at the people who'd abandoned her. But she did allow herself one glance at the Silver Bell Saloon as they passed. Marcus Holloway stood on the porch, watching them leave with a satisfied expression. Nora met his gaze and didn't look away until they'd turned the corner and he was out of sight. They traveled in silence for the first few miles, leaving Veta behind. The Colorado landscape stretched out around them, all golden grassland and distant mountains. It was beautiful, but Nora's heart was too heavy to appreciate it. She was leaving behind everything she'd ever known, heading into uncertainty with a man who was essentially a stranger. "Tell me about Sage Creek," she said finally, needing to break the oppressive silence. Wade seemed to relax slightly at the question. "It's smaller than Veta, but growing. There's a general store, a blacksmith, a church that doubles as a schoolhouse. The people are good, mostly ranchers and farmers, nothing like what you just left behind. And your ranch, the Thornton Ranch. I bought the land 2 years ago, started building it up from nothing. Right now I've got about 300 head of cattle and 4 hands who help me run things. It's hard work, but it's honest work, and it's mine." There was pride in his voice and something else. Freedom, maybe. "Where are you from originally?" Nora asked, curious despite herself. "Texas. Born and raised near San Antonio. My family had a small farm there." Wade's expression darkened slightly. "My father died when I was 16 and my mother a year later. I tried to keep the farm going, but the bank foreclosed." I spent a few years drifting, working cattle drives, doing whatever I could to save money. Then I came up here and found land I could afford. Been working ever since to make something of it." "I'm sorry about your parents," Nora said softly. She understood that loss all too well. "Thank you." "And I'm sorry about yours. Doc Martin mentioned your father passed a few years back." They fell into a more comfortable silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Wade pulled the wagon off the main trail toward a small grove of cottonwood trees near a creek. "We'll camp here for the night," he said. "It's not safe to travel in the dark and the horses need rest." Nora had never camped outside before, but she was determined not to be useless. While Wade tended to the horses, she gathered wood for a fire, using skills she'd learned from watching her father on their occasional trips into the mountains. By the time Wade had the animals settled, she had a respectable fire going. "You're full of surprises," he said with approval. "Most town women I know wouldn't have the first idea how to start a fire." "My father believed in practical education," Nora replied. "He said you never knew when you might need to take care of yourself." Wade pulled supplies from the wagon and set about making coffee and warming beans. Nora's shoulder throbbed painfully, and she must have winced because Wade paused in his work. "That wound needs tending," he said. "Do you have any medical supplies?" "A little. There's a tin with bandages and salve in my trunk." Nora didn't meet his eyes. The thought of him seeing the whip mark made her feel vulnerable in a way she didn't like. Wade found the tin and brought it over, along with a clean cloth he'd dampened in the creek. "May I?" he asked gently. Nora hesitated, then nodded. She carefully pulled down the shoulder of her dress, revealing the ugly welt. Wade's sharp intake of breath told her it looked as bad as it felt. "That bastard," he muttered, his hand surprisingly gentle as he cleaned the wound. "You could have been seriously hurt." "I was seriously hurt," Nora pointed out, trying for levity and failing. "You know what I mean. This could have been so much worse." Wade's jaw was tight as he applied the salve and wrapped the bandage. "A few inches to the left and it could have caught your neck. But it didn't, and that man didn't get hurt at all. That's what matters." Nora pulled her dress back up, intensely aware of how close Wade was sitting. In the firelight, his features were softer, and she noticed details she'd missed before. The scar above his left eyebrow, the calluses on his hands that spoke of hard work, the way his eyes were genuinely concerned, not with the calculating interest she'd seen in other men, but with real care. "Still," Wade said quietly, "it was brave. Stupid, maybe, but brave." "Bravery and stupidity often look the same," Nora replied. "My father used to say that." They ate their simple meal in companionable silence, and afterward Wade laid out bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire. Nora appreciated that he didn't try to be presumptuous, that he was giving her as much space and propriety as possible under the circumstances. "Get some rest," he said, settling into his own bedroll. "We've got another long day of travel tomorrow." Nora lay awake for a long time, staring up at the stars. They were brighter out here away from town, a vast canopy of light that made her feel both insignificant and part of something larger. She thought about the Chinese man and his sick wife, wondering if they'd gotten out of Veta safely. She thought about her father and what he would make of all this. She thought about Wade Thornton and why a stranger would go so far out of his way to help her. But mostly, she thought about how in the span of a single day, her entire life had been upended. She'd lost her home, her town, her sense of security. And yet, lying there under the stars with the sound of the creek burbling nearby, she didn't feel as devastated as she thought she should. Instead, there was a tiny spark of something that might have been excitement. For the first time in 3 years since her father's death, she was heading somewhere new. She had a chance to start over. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like the first deep breath after being underwater too long. The next day dawned clear and warm. Wade was already up when Nora woke, the fire rebuilt and coffee brewing. He handed her a cup without comment, and she accepted it gratefully. Her shoulder was stiff and sore, but the pain had dulled to a manageable ache. They broke camp efficiently, and soon they were back on the trail. The landscape gradually changed as they traveled, the mountains receding slightly as they moved into rolling grassland dotted with wildflowers. Nora found herself relaxing despite everything, lulled by the rhythm of the wagon and the warmth of the sun. "Tell me more about the ranch," she said. "What will my duties be exactly?" Wade considered the question. "Well, the bunkhouse has 4 men living in it right now. They're used to cooking for themselves, but it's usually beans and coffee and not much else. Having someone prepare proper meals would be a blessing. The main house needs cleaning. It's gotten away from me with all the other work. And I've been keeping the books myself, but I'm not particularly good at it. If you have any skill with numbers, that would be helpful." "I kept the books for the boarding house," Nora said. "I can handle that." "Good. Beyond that, you're welcome to make the place more livable. It's pretty sparse right now. A woman's touch would improve things considerably." Wade glanced at her. "I should mention that the Hands are good men. I'm particular about who I hire, but they're not used to having a woman around. I'll make sure they mind their manners, but if anyone gives you trouble, you come tell me directly." "I can handle myself," Nora said. "I've been running a boarding house for 3 years. I know how to deal with men." Wade's lips quirked. "I don't doubt that. Still, I want you to feel safe. This is your home now, not just a job. Home." The word caught Nora off guard. She hadn't thought of it that way, but he was right. The ranch was her home now. Veta was in the past. They stopped for a midday meal, letting the horses rest and graze. Nora walked around, working the stiffness out of her legs while Wade checked the wagon wheels and harnesses. When she returned, she found him staring at the horizon, his expression distant. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. Wade started slightly, as if he'd forgotten she was there. "Just wondering if I made the right decision, coming into Veta yesterday. I was heading to Fort Collins on business, but something made me stop. Now I'm a day behind schedule with unexpected company." He turned to her quickly. "Not that I regret it. I just wonder sometimes about the choices we make and how they change everything." "Do you believe in fate?" Nora asked. "I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe I just believe that some people are supposed to cross paths, and when they do, you can either ignore it or pay attention." Wade held her gaze. "I'm glad I paid attention yesterday." Nora felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the sun. "So am I," she admitted. "I was terrified and alone, and you appeared like something out of a dime novel, the mysterious stranger riding to the rescue." Wade laughed, and the sound transformed his face. "I'm not that mysterious, and I definitely don't feel like a hero, just a man trying to do the right thing." "That's what heroes are," Nora said quietly. "Ordinary people doing the right thing when everyone else is doing nothing." They resumed traveling, and as the afternoon wore on, Wade began pointing out landmarks. A distinctive rock formation that marked the boundary of his land. A stand of pine trees where he'd seen a bear the previous spring. The creek that ran through his property, providing water for the cattle. "There," he said finally, pointing ahead. "That's home." Nora looked where he indicated and saw a cluster of buildings in the distance. As they drew closer, she could make out a 2-story house, painted white with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Beside it was a large barn, a stable, a bunkhouse, and several smaller outbuildings. It was simple but solid, clearly built with care. It's beautiful, Nora said honestly. The house was nothing like her boarding house in town, but there was something appealing about its straightforward functionality. And the setting, surrounded by open grassland with mountains visible in the distance, was breathtaking. "It's home," Wade said again, and Nora heard the pride in his voice. "I built most of it myself with help from the hands, still working on the interior, but it's comfortable enough." As they pulled into the yard, men emerged from the barn. Nora counted 4 of them, all watching with open curiosity as Wade brought the wagon to a stop. "Boys," Wade called out, "this is Miss Nora Fletcher. She's going to be helping out around here with the cooking and housekeeping. I expect you all to treat her with respect." The men nodded, murmuring greetings. Nora studied them quickly. They ranged in age from maybe 18 to 40-something, all weathered by sun and work. They looked tough but not threatening, and she relaxed slightly. "Miss Fletcher, this is Tom Bradley, my foreman." Wade indicated a man in his late 30s with graying hair. "And that's Pete Sanchez, Jack Miller, and young Henry Walsh." "Pleased to meet you all," Nora said, keeping her voice steady and confident. "Madam," Tom said, touching his hat. The others followed suit. "It'll be nice to have proper meals for a change. Wade here burns water." "I do not," Wade protested, but he was grinning. "I just prefer my coffee strong and my beans well done." "You mean charred," Pete said with a laugh. The easy camaraderie between the men was evident, and Nora felt some of her nervousness fade. This was a good place. She could feel it. Wade helped her down from the wagon and led her toward the house. "Tom, can you and the boys unload Miss Fletcher's things? Put them on the porch for now, and she can decide where everything goes later." "Sure thing, boss." Inside, the house was indeed sparse, but it was clean and well built. The front door opened into a large main room with a stone fireplace at one end. To the left was a kitchen area with a proper stove and a pump for water. A staircase led to the second floor. "There are 3 bedrooms upstairs," Wade explained. "The large one at the front is mine. The 2 smaller ones in the back are empty. You can take whichever you prefer. There's also a small room down here off the kitchen that I've been using for an office." Nora walked through the space, her mind already cataloging what needed to be done. The floors needed sweeping, the windows washing. The kitchen was functional but could use better organization. Still, it was a solid house and she could see the potential. "This will do nicely," she said. "When would you like me to start?" Wade looked surprised. "You just got here, don't you want to rest?" "I'm fine. And the sooner I establish a routine, the better." Nora removed her shawl, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at her injured shoulder. "At least let me show you to your room and give you time to settle in," Wade insisted. "Dinner can wait a few hours." Reluctantly, Nora agreed. She chose the bedroom on the right, a small but comfortable space with a window overlooking the pastures. Wade and the hands brought up her trunk and other belongings, and then she was alone. Nora sat on the bed, testing the mattress. It was firm but not uncomfortable. She looked around at her new room, so different from the one she'd had in Veta, and felt the reality of her situation settle over her. This was her life now. She was living on a ranch, working for a man she'd just met, in a place she'd never been before. She should have felt afraid. Instead, she felt oddly liberated. That evening, Nora prepared her first meal in the ranch house kitchen. She kept it simple, making biscuits and gravy with fried potatoes and the last of some bacon she found in the cold cellar. When she rang the dinner bell Wade had shown her, the men came trooping in from their various chores, washing up at the pump outside before entering. They ate at a long table in the main room, and Nora was gratified by the silence that fell as the men dug into their food. When Tom asked for seconds, She knew she'd passed some invisible test. "Miss Fletcher, that was the best meal we've had in months," Wade said when they'd finished. "Thank you." "It's what you hired me for," Nora replied, but she was pleased. After the men had filed out, Wade stayed to help her clean up. "You don't have to do that," Nora protested. "This is my job." "Maybe, but I don't like the idea of you working while I sit idle." Wade rolled up his sleeves and began pumping water for the dishes. "Besides, it gives us a chance to talk. I wanted to make sure you're settling in all right." "I am. Everyone has been very welcoming." Nora washed a plate and handed it to him to dry. The domesticity of the moment struck her as oddly intimate. "Good. I meant what I said about this being your home. I know you didn't choose to come here, not really, but I hope you'll come to see it as more than just a place you ended up." Nora studied his profile as he focused on drying the dish in his hands. Wade Thornton was an enigma. He'd appeared out of nowhere, offered her help when no one else would, and now seemed genuinely concerned about her well-being. Men didn't usually act this way without ulterior motives, but she couldn't detect any hidden agenda in his actions. "Why did you really help me?" she asked quietly. "And please don't say it's just because someone helped you once. There has to be more to it than that." Wade was silent for a long moment, and Nora thought he might not answer. Then he set down the dish and turned to face her. 6 years ago, I was at my lowest point. I'd lost everything, my family, my home. I was angry at the world and making bad choices. I fell in with some rough characters and nearly ended up on the wrong side of the law. But there was this rancher, an old man named Samuel Crawford. He saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. He gave me a job, taught me about cattle and horses and honest work. He treated me like I mattered, like I had worth beyond what I'd lost. Wade's voice was thick with emotion. He died a year later, but in that year, he saved my life. Not dramatically, just by giving me a purpose and believing in me. When I saw you standing up to that man yesterday, protecting someone who couldn't protect himself, I saw the kind of person worth believing in. The kind of person Sam would have helped without a second thought. Nora felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you for telling me that, and thank you for seeing something worth helping." "I think we're going to be good friends, Nora Fletcher," Wade said with a gentle smile. "If that's all right with you." "It's all right with me," Nora replied, returning his smile. And she meant it. The days that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Nora woke early to prepare breakfast for the men, then spent the mornings cleaning and organizing the house. Afternoons were devoted to laundry, mending, and preparing dinner. In the evenings, after the dishes were done, she worked on the ranch books, bringing order to Wade's haphazard record-keeping. Wade was often around the house during the day, coming in for coffee or to check on something, and they fell into the habit of talking. Nora learned about his plans for the ranch, his hopes of expanding the herd and maybe breeding horses. Wade learned about her life in Veta, her parents, her dreams of maybe someday opening a dress shop. "You're good with a needle," Wade observed one evening, watching her mend one of Tom's shirts. "I've seen the stitching on those curtains you made for the parlor. My mother taught me. She was a seamstress before she married my father." Nora bit off the thread and examined her work. "I always thought I might follow in her footsteps, but then Papa needed help with the boarding house." "Maybe you still could. Sage Creek doesn't have a dress shop. I'll bet the women there would love having a seamstress nearby instead of having to send away for everything." The suggestion planted a seed in Nora's mind. Maybe she could do both, work at the ranch and slowly build up a sewing business. It was something to think about. 3 weeks after Nora's arrival, Wade announced that he needed to make the trip to Fort Collins he'd postponed when he'd helped her. "I'll be gone for about a week," he told her over breakfast. "Tom will be in charge of the ranch. If you need anything, go to him." Nora nodded, trying to ignore the flutter of disappointment in her chest. She'd grown used to Wade's presence, to their evening conversations and the way he made her feel safe. A week without him seemed longer than it should. "Be careful," she said. "Always am," Wade replied with a grin. Then more seriously, "Will you be all right here? I know you haven't been to Sage Creek yet. Maybe Tom could take you into town, let you meet some people." "That would be nice," Nora admitted. She'd been so focused on settling in that she hadn't thought much about the town just 5 miles away. True to his word, Tom took her to Sage Creek 2 days after Wade left. The town was small, just a cluster of buildings along a main street, but it had a friendly feel that Veta had lost years ago. Tom introduced her to the owners of the general store, the Hendersons, a kindly couple in their 50s. "We've heard all about you from Wade," Mrs. Henderson said warmly. "He was so pleased to have found someone to help with the ranch house. You must come to church on Sunday. Everyone will want to meet you." Nora agreed, touched by the woman's genuine friendliness. She bought supplies, including fabric to make new curtains for the upstairs bedrooms, and enjoyed walking around the town. It was smaller than Veta, but felt more like a real community. On Sunday, she attended the church service, which was held in a simple wooden building that also served as the schoolhouse. The congregation was small, maybe 30 people, but they welcomed her warmly. Several women invited her to a quilting circle that met on Thursday afternoons, and Nora found herself accepting. By the time Wade returned from Fort Collins, Nora had begun to feel like she belonged in Sage Creek. She'd made friends, established herself as part of the community, and even received her first request for sewing work when a young woman asked if she could make a dress for her upcoming wedding. Wade rode into the yard just before dinner, looking dusty and tired but pleased. Nora had the meal ready, and after he'd washed up and the men had eaten, he lingered in the kitchen while she cleaned up. "I heard you went into town," he said. "How did you find it?" "I liked it very much. Everyone was welcoming." Nora handed him a dish to dry, their routine so established now that he didn't even ask before helping. "Mrs. Henderson mentioned you talked about me." Wade had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I may have mentioned to a few people that I'd hired someone to help at the ranch. I wanted to make sure you'd be welcomed." "That was kind of you." Nora paused in her washing, looking at him directly. "You've been very kind to me since we met. I want you to know how much I appreciate it." "Nora," Wade said quietly, setting down his towel, "I need to tell you something. I've been trying to find the right time, and I suppose there's no perfect moment, so I'll just say it. These past few weeks, having you here, getting to know you, it's made me realize something. You're not just an employee. You're not even just a friend, though I value your friendship. I find myself thinking about you when I'm out in the fields. I look forward to our conversations in the evening. When I was in Fort Collins, all I could think about was getting back here to see you." Nora's heart was pounding. She'd felt the shift between them too, the way their casual touches had begun to linger, the way she caught herself watching for him throughout the day. But she'd told herself it was just gratitude, just the natural closeness that came from living in the same house. "Wade," she whispered, "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything right now. I just wanted you to know how I feel, but I also want you to know that nothing has to change. You have a job here for as long as you want it, regardless of how you feel about me. I would never use your situation against you or make you feel uncomfortable." Wade's eyes were sincere, almost pleading. "I'm not like Marcus Holloway. I'm not trying to control you or force you into anything." "I know that," Nora said quickly. "You've never made me feel anything but safe and respected. It's just that everything happened so fast, and I'm still figuring out who I am now that I'm not in Veta anymore. I don't want to confuse gratitude with something else. I understand. Take all the time you need. Wade smiled, though Nora could see the disappointment in his eyes. I'm a patient man. In the weeks that followed, things between them were slightly awkward. Nora found herself hyper-aware of Wade's presence, analyzing her own feelings every time they were together. Did she care for him because he'd saved her, or was there something more? She'd never been in love before, had never had time for courtship when she was running the boarding house and caring for her aging father. She didn't know what love was supposed to feel like. But she knew she missed him when he was gone. She knew his laugh made her smile even when she was tired. She knew the way he treated his horses and his men with firm kindness and respect made her admire him. She knew that when he looked at her, she felt seen in a way she never had before. One evening in late September, after a day spent helping with the fall roundup by cooking for extra hands, Nora sat on the porch watching the sunset. Wade joined her, 2 cups of coffee in hand. Thought you could use this, he said, offering her one. Thank you. Nora accepted it gratefully. The air had turned crisp with the approach of autumn, and the warmth of the cup felt good against her palms. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to deep purple. Finally, Nora spoke. I've been thinking about what you said, about your feelings for me. Wade tensed beside her. And I think I've been feeling the same way. I was just afraid to admit it, afraid that I was making a mistake or moving too fast. But the truth is, when I think about the future, you're in it. When something good happens, you're the first person I want to tell. When I'm worried or sad, it's your voice I want to hear. Nora set down her coffee and turned to face him. I care about you, Wade Thornton, more than I probably should given how little time we've known each other, but I do. Wade's face broke into a brilliant smile. You have no idea how happy I am to hear that. He reached out and took her hand, his touch warm and solid. Nora, I want to court you properly. I want to take you to church socials and dances. I want to buy you flowers and candy. I want everyone in Sage Creek to know that you're my girl if you'll have me. I'll have you, Nora said, laughing. Though I should warn you, I've never been courted before. I might not know the rules. Then we'll make up our own rules. Wade lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The only rule that matters is honesty. I'll always be honest with you, and I hope you'll do the same for me. I promise, Nora whispered. Their courtship was everything Wade had promised and more. He took her to the church social, where they danced under lantern light and ate apple pie. He brought her wildflowers from the meadow, presenting them shyly like a schoolboy. They took long walks in the evening, talking about everything and nothing, their hands clasped together. The ranch hands teased them mercilessly but good-naturedly. About time, boss, Tom said when Wade announced officially that he and Nora were courting. We've been taking bets on when you'd finally work up the courage. You've been betting on my love life. Wade asked, torn between amusement and outrage. Someone had to provide entertainment around here, Pete said with a grin. And for the record, I won. I said it would be before October. Nora blushed but laughed along with the men. She'd become fond of all of them, appreciating their loyalty to Wade and their acceptance of her. They'd become like the family she'd lost. As autumn deepened into winter, Nora's feelings for Wade only grew stronger. She loved his steadiness, his integrity, the way he treated everyone with respect regardless of their station. She loved how he worked alongside his men rather than standing apart from them. She loved the gentleness in his hands when he helped a newborn calf or bandaged an injured horse. She loved the way he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. In November, Wade asked her to accompany him on a trip to deliver cattle to a buyer in Denver. They would be gone for a week, staying in hotels along the way, and he was careful to assure her that everything would be proper and chaperoned. "Mrs. Henderson has agreed to come along as your companion," he explained. "I wouldn't want anyone to question your reputation." Nora appreciated his thoughtfulness, even as she privately thought that her reputation had already been questioned and found wanting by the people of Veta. But she agreed, excited at the prospect of seeing Denver. The trip was wonderful. Denver was larger and more bustling than anywhere Nora had ever been, full of fine buildings and well-dressed people. Wade's business was concluded successfully, and he insisted on taking her shopping. "Pick out whatever you'd like," he said, gesturing to the dress shop they'd entered. "Consider it an early Christmas present. Wade, I can't let you buy me a dress. It's too expensive." Nora ran her fingers over a beautiful blue fabric, tempted despite herself. "You can and you will. You work hard, Nora. You deserve something nice." Wade's tone was firm but kind. "Besides, I want to see you in something you chose just because you wanted it, not because it was practical or necessary." Nora selected the blue fabric, along with some lace for trim, and the shopkeeper took her measurements and promised to have the dress ready in 2 days. True to her word, when they returned to collect it, the dress was perfect. Nora wore it to dinner at the hotel that night, and the way Wade's eyes lit up when he saw her made every moment of hesitation about accepting his gift worthwhile. "You're beautiful," he said simply, offering her his arm. Over dinner, Wade grew serious. "Nora, there's something I want to discuss with you. We've been courting for 2 months now, and every day I'm more certain that you're the woman I want to spend my life with." Nora's heart skipped a beat. "Wade, I'm not proposing yet," he said quickly. "I know we should give it more time, let you be sure of your feelings, but I want you to know my intentions. I want to marry you, Nora Fletcher. I want to make you my wife, make the ranch truly our home. I want to build a life with you, raise children with you, grow old with you." Tears pricked Nora's eyes. "I want that too," she admitted. "I think I've wanted it for a while now, but I was afraid to say it out loud." "Then we're agreed. We'll wait until spring, give it a proper amount of time so no one can say we rushed. And then, if you're still willing, I'll ask you formally." Wade reached across the table and took her hand. "Until then, know that you have my heart completely." "And you have mine," Nora whispered. The winter passed in a blur of contentment. Nora continued her work at the ranch, but now it felt different. She wasn't just the housekeeper anymore. She was planning their future, thinking about where to put the nursery she hoped would someday be needed, imagining holidays and celebrations with friends and family. She attended the quilting circle every Thursday, and the women there became her friends. They shared recipes and gossip, helped each other with sewing projects, and offered advice on everything from gardening to marriage. When Nora quietly mentioned that Wade intended to propose in the spring, the women erupted in excitement. "I knew it," Mrs. Henderson said triumphantly. "The way that man looks at you, it was only a matter of time." Christmas was magical. Wade cut down a pine tree, and Nora decorated it with strings of popcorn and paper ornaments. The ranch hands joined them for a feast, and they sang carols by the fireplace. Wade gave Nora a beautiful shawl he'd had made from the softest wool, and she gave him a shirt she'd sewn herself, with careful stitching and a monogram over the pocket. "It's perfect," Wade said, running his fingers over the embroidery. "Thank you." That night, after everyone had gone, they sat together by the dying fire. Wade's arm was around her shoulders, and Nora's head rested against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "This is the best Christmas I've had since my parents died," Wade said quietly. "Having you here, it makes this house feel like a real home." "I feel the same way," Nora replied. "When I think about where I was a year ago in Veta and so alone, And where I am now, with you and a whole town of people who care about me, it feels like a dream. It's not a dream. It's real and it's ours." Wade pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "And it's only going to get better." As winter gave way to early spring, Wade began acting nervous. Nora suspected she knew why, but she didn't say anything, content to let him proceed in his own time. Then, on a sunny day in April, he asked her to take a walk with him after dinner. They walked to the creek that ran through the property, the water high with snowmelt. Wade had been quiet during the walk, and Nora could feel the tension radiating from him. Finally, he stopped at a spot where wildflowers were just beginning to bloom. "Nora," he said, taking both her hands in his, "I've been practicing this speech for weeks, but now that the moment is here, all my words have fled, so I'll just speak from the heart. You came into my life when I least expected it, and you've changed everything. You've made me happier than I ever thought possible. You've made my house a home and my dreams feel achievable. I love you, Nora Fletcher. I love your courage, your kindness, your strength. I love the way you hum while you cook, and the way you scrunch your nose when you're concentrating on the books. I love everything about you, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you how much." Wade released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, pulling out a simple gold band with a small diamond. "Will you marry me? Will you be my wife and my partner in all things?" "Yes," Nora said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Wade, I'll marry you. I love you too, so much that sometimes it scares me, but it's the good kind of scared, the kind that makes you feel alive." Wade slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he was kissing her, properly kissing her, and Nora felt like fireworks were going off in her chest. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Wade rested his forehead against hers. "You've made me the happiest man in Colorado," he murmured. "And you've given me a home when I lost everything," Nora replied. "You've given me a town to call my own, a place where I belong. I'll spend the rest of my life being grateful that you were in Veta that day. I'll spend the rest of my life being grateful that you were brave enough to stand up for what was right," Wade countered. "That's what brought us together, your courage." They set the wedding date for June, giving them time to prepare and send invitations. Nora wrote to her cousin in Denver, hoping to mend that relationship, and was pleased when she received a warm letter in response saying the woman would attend. Wade had no family left, but his ranch hands were like brothers to him, and they would stand up with him. The women of Sage Creek rallied around Nora, helping her sew her wedding dress and plan the reception. Mrs. Henderson insisted on making the cake, and the church was decorated with wildflowers and ribbons. It was a simple wedding by city standards, but to Nora, it was perfect. On the morning of June 15, 1879, Nora stood in the small room at the back of the church, wearing her white dress and trembling with excitement. Her cousin helped arrange her veil, tears in her own eyes. "I'm sorry I wasn't there for you when your father died," she said quietly. "I was dealing with my own troubles, but that's no excuse. You deserved better from family." "You're here now," Nora said, squeezing her hand. "That's what matters." When the music started and Nora walked down the aisle, she saw Wade standing at the altar and everything else faded away. He was wearing a new suit, his hair neatly combed, but it was the expression on his face that took her breath away. He looked at her like she was everything he'd ever wanted, like she was a miracle. The ceremony was beautiful. They exchanged vows in front of their friends and community, promising to love and honor each other for the rest of their lives. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Wade kissed her with such tenderness that Nora felt tears slip down her cheeks. The reception was held in the churchyard, with tables laden with food and a small area cleared for dancing. Wade pulled Nora into his arms for the first dance, and as they swayed to the music, she felt a profound sense of rightness. "How does it feel to be Mrs. Thornton?" Wade asked softly. "It feels perfect," Nora replied. "It feels like coming home." They danced until sunset, celebrating with their friends and the community that had embraced them. As the evening drew to a close, Wade and Nora slipped away to the wagon he'd decorated with flowers and ribbons. They drove back to the ranch, now truly their home as husband and wife. That night in the bedroom they would now share, Wade was gentle and patient, making sure Nora felt safe and loved. Afterward, they lay tangled together, talking quietly about their future. "I want at least 3 children," Wade said, running his fingers through her hair. "Maybe 4. I want this house full of noise and laughter." 3 or 4 sounds perfect, Nora agreed, "and I want to keep sewing." Mrs. Henderson mentioned that several women in town have asked if I'd be willing to take on more work. "I think I could build a real business if I wanted to." "Then do it. I want you to be happy, Nora, whatever that looks like." Wade pulled her closer. "I still can't quite believe you're real sometimes. That you're here, that you're mine. I'm real, and I'm yours, just as you're mine." Nora kissed him softly. "Thank you for giving me a home, Wade, for giving me a place to belong. Thank you for being brave enough to stand up for what's right, even when it cost you everything. That's what brought you to me, and I'll be grateful for it every day for the rest of my life." The first year of their marriage was blissful. Nora managed the household and continued taking in sewing work, building a reputation as the best seamstress in the area. Wade expanded the ranch, adding more cattle and beginning the horse breeding program he'd dreamed about. They worked together on the books, planned improvements to the property, and made decisions as true partners. In the spring of 1880, Nora discovered she was pregnant. Wade was ecstatic, treating her like she was made of glass, until she laughingly told him she wasn't going to break. That November, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy they named Samuel, after the rancher who had saved Wade years before. Holding her son in her arms, with Wade sitting beside her on the bed looking at them both with such love and wonder, Nora thought about how much her life had changed. 2 years ago, she'd been alone and frightened, watching her whole world crumble. Now she had a husband she loved, a son, a home, and a community that valued her. "He's perfect," Wade whispered, gently touching Samuel's tiny hand. "He really is," Nora agreed. "I can't wait to teach him about the world, about being kind and standing up for what's right." "He'll learn that from you," Wade said, kissing her forehead. "You're the bravest person I know." As the years passed, the Thornton family grew. 2 years after Samuel came a daughter they named Sarah, with Nora's dark hair and Wade's smile. Then, 3 years later, twin boys they named James and Joseph, who kept everyone on their toes with their boundless energy. The ranch prospered under Wade's management. The horse breeding program became successful, with buyers coming from as far as Texas to purchase Thornton horses. Nora's sewing business grew as well, and eventually they added a small shop onto the house where she could work and meet with clients. Sage Creek grew too, adding new businesses and families. The Thorntons were pillars of the community, known for their generosity and fairness. When a family fell on hard times, Wade was the first to offer work or a loan. When someone needed a dress for a special occasion but couldn't afford it, Nora would quietly charge less or sometimes nothing at all. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Wade surprised Nora with a trip back to Denver. They stayed in the same hotel where they'd stayed before their engagement, and Wade took her to a fine restaurant for dinner. "You ever think about Veta?" he asked over dessert. "About what happened?" Nora considered the question. "Sometimes. I wonder what became of that Chinese man and his wife if they found safety somewhere. I hope they did. But I don't regret what I did, if that's what you're asking. Standing up for him, even though it cost me my home, it was the right thing to do. I know it was. That's one of the things I love most about you. You have a moral compass that never wavers. Wade reached across the table to take her hand. I also want you to know that I received a letter last week. Marcus Holloway is dead. He had a heart attack in his saloon. Nora felt a complex mix of emotions. She'd wished the man would face justice for his cruelty, but she'd never wished him dead. How do you feel about that? Honestly, relieved. I always worried he might come after you someday, try to cause trouble. Now that threat is gone. Wade squeezed her hand. His death doesn't change the past, but it does mean you're truly free of him. I've been free of him for 10 years, Nora said firmly. He took my house, but he never took my spirit. And in losing Veta, I gained something so much better. I gained you, our children, our life here. If I could go back and change what happened, I wouldn't, because it led me exactly where I was meant to be. Wade's eyes shone with emotion. I love you, Nora Thornton. I love you too, Wade, more than I can ever express. They returned to Sage Creek renewed, ready to continue building their life together. The children grew, each developing their own personalities. Samuel was steady and thoughtful, already showing an aptitude for ranch management. Sarah was creative and kind, spending hours with her mother learning to sew. The twins were mischievous but good-hearted, always finding new adventures on the ranch. One evening, when the children were tucked into bed and Wade and Nora sat on the porch watching the stars, Wade spoke quietly. Do you remember what I said to you that first night we camped under the stars, about believing that some people are supposed to cross paths? I remember, Nora said, leaning against his shoulder. I think about that sometimes. About how if I'd ridden through Veta an hour earlier or later, if you'd stayed home that day, if 1,000 small things had been different, we might never have met. And I'm so grateful that everything happened exactly as it did. So am I, Nora whispered. You gave me a home when I lost mine. You gave me a town where I belong. You gave me love when I thought I'd spend my life alone. You gave me everything, Wade. No, Wade said, turning to look at her in the starlight. You gave me everything. You gave my life meaning and purpose. You made me better than I was. And every single day, I wake up grateful that you were brave enough to stand up for that stranger, because it brought you into my life. Nora kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into that single gesture. When they finally pulled apart, she rested her head on his shoulder again, completely at peace. Tell me about tomorrow, she said, a game they'd played since their early courtship days. Tomorrow, I'll wake up next to my beautiful wife. We'll have breakfast with our children. I'll work the ranch with good men I trust. You'll create beautiful things with your needle. And at the end of the day, we'll sit here together, just like this, and count our blessings. Wade's voice was warm with contentment. And the day after that, and the day after that, for the rest of our lives. That sounds perfect, Nora murmured. And it was. Their life together was full of the normal challenges any family faces, the sick children and lean years and disagreements, but through it all, their love remained constant. They built a legacy in Sage Creek, not just through their successful businesses, but through their kindness and integrity. As their children grew and started families of their own, Wade and Nora watched with pride. Samuel took over the ranch management, marrying a local girl and having 3 children of his own. Sarah became a teacher in Sage Creek, marrying a kind young lawyer and filling the schoolhouse with her patience and creativity. The twins, inseparable as always, went into business together, opening a stable and freight company that served the growing region. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Wade and Nora stood on the porch, watching their children and grandchildren playing in the yard, and marveled at what they'd built together. "Can you believe it's been 25 years?" Nora asked, her hair now streaked with gray but her eyes still bright. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I saw you standing in that street, protecting someone who couldn't protect himself. Other times it feels like I've known you my whole life." Wade wrapped his arm around her waist. "Either way, they've been the best 25 years I could have imagined." "Mine too," Nora agreed. "You know, I should write a letter to that Chinese man from Veta if I could find him. Thank him for being in trouble that day, because helping him led me to you." Wade chuckled. "Only you would think to thank someone for being a victim of injustice." "I'm serious, though. His suffering inadvertently brought me the greatest happiness of my life. That doesn't diminish what happened to him, but it does show how something good can come from something bad." Nora watched her grandson, little Wade, named after his grandfather, chasing his sister around the yard. "I hope he found happiness too. I hope standing up for him made a difference in his life, even if it's just knowing that someone cared enough to try." "I'm sure it did," Wade said softly. "Just like someone standing up for me all those years ago changed my life. Kindness ripples outward, Nora. You taught me that. Every person you've helped with your sewing, every family I've given work to, every time our children show compassion to others, it's because of the example you set that day in Veta." Nora felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears. "We've had a good life, haven't we?" "The best," Wade confirmed, "and we're not done yet. I plan on spending at least another 25 years with you, Mrs. Thornton." "Only 25, Nora teased. "I was thinking more like 50. They laughed together, and their children looked up from the yard, smiling at their parents' obvious happiness. Later, at the anniversary dinner, Samuel stood to make a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass. "You've shown us what it means to build a life based on love, hard work, and integrity. You've created not just a successful ranch, but a home filled with warmth and laughter. You've been pillars of this community and examples to us all. Thank you for everything you've given us, and here's to many more years of health and happiness." "Hear, hear," everyone chorused, and Wade and Nora smiled at each other across the table, their hands clasped together. As the evening wound down and the family began to leave, Sarah pulled her mother aside. "Mama, I wanted to tell you something. The school board has asked me to organize a program teaching children about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. I immediately thought of you and what you did in Veta. Would you be willing to come speak to the students about it?" Nora was touched. "I'd be honored. Though I'm not sure I'm the best example. I lost everything when I stood up to Marcus Holloway." "But you gained so much more," Sarah countered. "And even if you hadn't, even if you'd spent the rest of your life struggling, you still would have done the right thing. That's the lesson I want the children to learn, that doing what's right matters more than what it costs us. When you put it that way, how can I refuse?" Nora hugged her daughter tightly. "I'll speak to your students, and I'll tell them about the cowboy who gave me a home when I lost mine, because that's part of the story too. Kindness begets kindness." Over the next few years, Nora spoke at the school several times, and her story became well known in Sage Creek. She and Wade were looked up to as examples of what a good marriage and a good life could be. They continued to be active in the community well into their 60s, only gradually slowing down as age began to take its toll. When Wade's health began to fail in his 70th year, Nora nursed him with the same fierce devotion she'd shown throughout their marriage. The children visited frequently, bringing the grandchildren to cheer him up. On his good days, Wade would sit on the porch and tell stories about the old days, about building the ranch and meeting Nora and all the adventures they'd had together. On a warm summer evening, very similar to the one when Wade had first told Nora he loved her, he took her hand and spoke quietly. "Nora, I need you to promise me something." "Anything," she said, fighting back tears. She knew what was coming. The doctor had been honest about Wade's condition. "Promise me you won't spend the rest of your life grieving. You've got years left in you, and I want you to live them fully. Keep sewing, keep spending time with the children and grandchildren, keep being the light you've always been." Wade's voice was weak but steady. "And know that loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life. You made me better than I ever thought I could be." "You did the same for me," Nora whispered through her tears. "You saved me, Wade, in every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," Wade corrected gently. "That's what love is, Nora, saving each other every single day." Wade passed peacefully in his sleep that night, Nora's hand in his. She grieved him deeply, as did the entire community of Sage Creek. The church was packed for his funeral, with people standing outside to pay their respects. Tom, now an old man himself, delivered a eulogy that had everyone in tears, speaking about Wade's kindness, his integrity, and his love for his family. True to her promise, Nora didn't let grief consume her. She continued living at the ranch, which Samuel now managed, and kept taking in sewing work. She spent time with her children and grandchildren, and eventually great-grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather and the early days of the ranch. But every evening, she would sit on the porch in the spot where she and Wade had spent so many nights together, and she would talk to him as if he were still there. She told him about her day, about the grandchildren's achievements, about the changes in Sage Creek. And sometimes, when the stars were particularly bright, she swore she could feel him there beside her, his presence a comfort and a reminder of their love. Nora lived to be 83 years old, remaining active and engaged until the very end. On the evening before she passed, surrounded by her children, she spoke her last words clearly. "Tell everyone to be brave," she said. "Tell them to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard, because you never know what blessings might come from one moment of courage." At her funeral, the church was even more packed than it had been for Wade's. Sarah stood to deliver the eulogy, her voice strong despite her tears. "My mother taught me that true courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing what's right despite being afraid. She showed me that losing everything doesn't mean losing hope. She demonstrated through her life that kindness matters, that standing up for others matters, that love matters most of all." Sarah looked out at the congregation, seeing faces from all walks of life, all touched in some way by Nora's generosity. She lost her town when she stood up for a stranger, but she gained a new town, a new life, a love that lasted decades, and a family that will carry on her legacy. If that's not a life well lived, I don't know what is. Nora was buried beside Wade on the ranch, on a hill overlooking the pastures where they'd built their life together. The headstone was simple, bearing their names and dates and a single inscription that Samuel had chosen. They stood for justice and built a legacy of love. Years later, their great-great-grandchildren would play on that same ranch, running through fields that Wade and Nora had worked to create. The house would be expanded and renovated, but the core of it remained the same, still standing strong. Sage Creek continued to grow and prosper, and the Thornton name remained synonymous with integrity and kindness. And sometimes, on summer evenings when the stars were particularly bright, people would swear they could see two figures sitting on the old porch, hands clasped together, watching over the land and the legacy they'd built. It was just a story, of course, the kind that small towns love to tell. But it was a story based in truth, about a woman who stood up for what was right and lost everything, and the cowboy who gave her a new town to call home, and the love that bloomed between them that changed countless lives for the better. Because in the end, that's what mattered. Not the hardships or the losses, but the love they shared and the example they set. Nora had stood between a whip and a stranger, and in that single act of courage, she'd found her destiny. Wade had offered help to someone in need, and in doing so, he'd found his soulmate. Together, they'd built something that lasted far beyond their own lives, a testament to the power of kindness, courage, and love. Their story was told and retold in Sage Creek for generations, passed down from parents to children, a reminder that doing what's right, even at great personal cost, can lead to blessings beyond imagination. It was a story about second chances and new beginnings, about how the worst day of your life can be the doorway to the best days yet to come. And it all started with one woman's courage to stand up for a stranger, and one man's kindness in offering her a home. From those simple acts grew a love that lasted a lifetime, and a legacy that lasted forever. In the Wild West of 1878, in a small Colorado town called Sage Creek, Wade Thornton and Nora Fletcher proved that sometimes losing everything means gaining what truly matters, and that the greatest treasures in life are the ones we build together, one day at a time, with love as the foundation and courage as the cornerstone.